Good evening, friends. So here we are. Welcome to the valedictory function of the two-day international conference, Strengthening Democracy in India, Inclusion, Participation, and Rights. May I invite Mr. Yashwant Sinha, former External Affairs Minister and Finance Minister. We are pleased to have you, sir, amongst us. We also have on the stage with us Mr. Carl Gershman, Mr. Richard Gupwell, and we'll also be having Mr. Hang Dong Fang, and of course, Dr. George Matthew to give us the welcome address. May I invite you, sir, to give us the welcome address and welcome remarks for the valedictory function. Thank you.
Yashwant Sinha ji, Carl Gershman, Dick Upwell, dear friends. How happy I am today, this evening, for this valedictory session. What a wonderful two-day program we had. And maybe with the welcome dinner 2 days back. The enormous energy with which all the participants here gave their input for a wonderful academic and intellectual session, that was amazing. As I mentioned in the inaugural session, 20 countries were represented. Then some organizers told me, Dr. Matthew, it is more than 20 countries represented in this program. And you all remember how wonderful it was, that inaugural session with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. The way he took all of us, our thoughts, our feelings up for peace, for the humanity, our love for a great leader of India, we will never forget that occasion as well. After the inauguration, we had about 5 sessions. Strategies to promote democracy among marginalized workers, youth approaches in building democratic process, promoting women's entrepreneurship in South Asia, resource extraction, land disputes and marginalized communities, and right to information and freedom of expression. Just now we were listening to that. And yesterday the crowning point was also Kailash Satyarthi came here, and he was in conversation with Fred Redmond, a very outstanding trade union leader of US, and the subject was dignity of children, freedom and education. And Shona Bader-Brown of Solidarity Center chaired that session. And friends, we have today with us a very outstanding leader, Yashwant Sinha ji, for this valedictory session. Yashwant Sinha ji was an Indian administrative officer, Indian Administrative Service Officer, IAS, for 24 years. And after 25 years, he quit that prestigious Indian administrative service and entered public life. And who was his real hero? It was Jayaprakash Narayan from the state of Bihar, who really Jayaprakash Narayan was the leader of a peaceful movement who challenged the establishment of this country. The establishment was the most powerful in those days. And we were all young at that time. JP movement. And Yashwant Sinha, throughout his very prestigious career, and entered public life. And I had a great opportunity to work with him in the Janata Party in those days. And later, he became Union Minister, the Minister for the federal government here. Two most important portfolios, finance and external affairs. As finance minister, he did revolutionary things at that time. People even today remember that. And external affairs minister, he traveled extensively. I remember Yashwantji at the inaugural meeting of the Community of Democracies in Seoul in 2002, he was a chief guest, and we were all there. And when I mentioned to him that we have a two-day program and focusing on the legacy of George Fernandes, he readily accepted. He received my call from a village in a remote forest area in Hazaribagh, and he said, yes, George, I will come for this. And he's still a very active and busy person in public life. And let us all give a big hand welcoming. Dick Gapwell, if I remember correctly, his relation with George Fernandes and movements here began around about 35 years ago. 35 years ago. And then he was a political advisor to the socialist group of the European Parliament in Brussels. And he served in that position 20 years. And he created an institute in Brussels. It is called European Institute for Asian Studies. And when I mentioned to Dick that we have a program like this, he readily agreed, and he is here with us. Let us welcome Dick for this function. Carl, I have no words to thank Carl for all the support he extended for this program. This idea I shared with him a couple of years back, and slowly it developed. Every stage, Carl was with me, giving ideas, how to go about it, support, all that. And a very, very dear friend of George Fernandes. Carl, we are very grateful to you, and a very warm welcome for this valedictory session. So I welcome all of you, and the tea is only after this session, and then the farewell dinner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew. I would now like to invite Mr. Hang Dong Fang former steering committee member, World Movement for Democracy. Please, sir, come in.
Dear guests, on behalf of World Movement for Democracy, as a former steering committee member, and I have the pleasure to follow very, very closely, sometimes tired, of course, in the middle of the section, but I follow everything very closely. I took my notes, and I would like to highlight a few things here, and those points I didn't highlight. Please don't feel offended. Everything is important, but as a trade unionist, particular from China, you should know that communist regime and trade union movement is kind of tricky in that country. So as a trade unionist, I have my own highlight, and also, of course, on behalf of World Movement for Democracy. And the first highlight is, of course, naturally, the trade union rights and the workers' rights. The workers' rights to collective bargaining. So the first section, I listened very, very, very carefully. And without rights to collective bargaining to the workers, how can we imagine there is a proper democracy? And here we were talking about inclusion, participation, and rights. What is inclusion? Where? It's daily life. It's about the cake. It's about how to share the cake. And it's about, our whole life is about produce and distribution. And there are other things, of course, as His Holiness Dalai Lama said. It's the spiritual, of course. But here we're talking about practically how can we produce, how those people who produce things share their fair parts. That is a workplace democracy. And think about starting from 19th century, all the way through here, without workplace democracy, without the trade union movement struggle. And how can we have today many successful democracy? So trade union movement, workplace collective bargaining really laid one of the most important pillars for today's democracy on earth. And second, I want to say, again, as a trade unionist woman, that section was wonderful. And this is the first time I listened to such a panel and such an interactive, energetic section. But may I leave a question to all of you, and especially the panelists, a question, because I saw many people raise their hands. I had a question to raise, to put out. I didn't have a chance, and now I smuggle my question in. And you don't have to answer. You're all very successful entrepreneurs. I am asking those workers, especially women workers, working for you, do they have the rights to bargain with you? You don't have to answer now. Think about that. Sorry. You want to say something?
We intend giving them the bargaining power. That's our mission in life. We work with communities in distress.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Of course, half of labor are women. And women without rights to bargain workplaces, I don't believe we can achieve women's rights, and we can achieve human rights and democracy. And third, I really feel impressed by the new generation, particularly the way they can use the new technology, internet, being innovative and new ideas. And I remember what our young friend from Cambodia specifically mention the fear. We are young. We don't really remember much about the past, the terrible time. Therefore, we don't remember much about the fear. And what is politics? And I did write this part on social media, my social media account in China, Weixin. You know, there are several hundred million people are using it. And fear is the biggest, one of the biggest enemy to democracy. So if young people don't want to talk about politics, they want to talk about IT, how IT in this country, that country arranged, what's the problem, and what the government try to control it undemocratically. And that is politics. And we don't have to make people afraid first and thinking about they are talking about politics, but they are talking about politics. Politics is everyday's life, and democracy is about everyday's life. It's not only about those terms in books. And if I may, personally, I'd like to make a recommendation. If next time the AND and the World Movement for Democracy, if possible, to make a special session on China. I hear China every section. And China is nearly everywhere, trouble. And every section I heard that this related to China, that related to China, and everything. And I really wish World Movement for Democracy and AND can arrange a special section on China. Let's talk about China. China, if China goes here, it affects the security of the region, economy, and everything. So it's not because I'm a Chinese. I really believe this is a very important subject. I really wish things can be done specifically on that country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And without fear, we shall move ahead. I would now like to invite Mr. Henry Tiffagny, Steering Committee Member, Asia Democracy Network.
That's it. Revered guest on the dais and my dear friends. I represent the steering committee on behalf of Forum Asia, which I chair, and therefore have the pleasure to be in your midst. I have first the pleasant duty to convey from the coordinator of ADN. You see how fast ADN works, that the next session of the ADN will definitely be concentrating on China. So that's, I'm not saying it myself, I've got it from the coordinator. I also want to thank the World Democracy Movement and ISS for this wonderful opportunity provided for many of us for being together here to express and feel a sense of solidarity across the regions on many of the issues which many people here today are pushed to a sense of silence within their own lives. This is for the Asian Democracy Network, the first of a mass event in South Asia. And South Asia is important if you discuss democracy in the globe for very many reasons. The Asian Democracy Network, prior to these 2 days, also had its steering committee. And after the steering committee had a round table which concentrated particularly on the situation or the state of democracy in South Asia. We had a number of experiences from different parts of the region which raised the issues that many of us face and the challenges ahead of us, but also the signs of hope that this region has thrown up. Bangladesh was there, Nepal was there, Afghanistan was there, Pakistan was there, Maldives was there, Sri Lanka was there, and India was there. And I think as much as we spoke about the issues that we face, we also ended up on a note of the positive developments that had taken place in the region and how this region had something in the future. The People's Sack that was spoken of there was a sign of hope, that these democracies, in spite of all the difficulties we might be having with our respective governments, the People's Sack was a spark of hope for many of us there. The efforts undertaken by different organizations to establish a regional South Asian human rights mechanism in this region, in a region which doesn't have anything, and the initial efforts towards that was another sign of hope that came from there. These 2 days have indicated for many of us, particularly in the field of human rights, that we are all in a society where our space to function has been shrinking. We've heard 2 names today. We've heard the name of Jayaprakash Narayanan. We've heard the name of George Fernandes. George Fernandes, this entire 2 days being dedicated to him. And if they, during their days, did not have their right to association and their right to assembly, which made them come on the streets and organize the movements that Mr. Yashwant Sinha himself belonged to, perhaps the country would not be what it is today. And therefore, I think for all of us, we need to come together as people around the globe to ensure that our right to association and our right to assembly is ensured, and therefore that many other rights that we are able to get by genuine, democratic, peaceful, non-violent struggles on the road would be able to take us to progress. We were able to see that civil society organizations are caught in this limited space, whether we are working with the labor movement, whether we are working with the marginalized, whether we are working with the youth, on issues of land, on women, on right to information, on many of these things. We said the way democracy affects the poorest of the poor, the excluded communities, is strikingly different from the way it affects those who are in positions of power. And we have seen it in these 2 days. We have seen it in innumerable ways these 2 days. And therefore, I think there is a slant to this definition of democracy. A democracy which brings the excluded in, makes them participate, and ensures a rights regime. And that is the very pointed focus of democracy that we were speaking about here. If that powerful definition of democracy has to be put in place, I think our sister in the last session, Nazreen from Bangladesh, said there is a need to make sacrifices. We all need to take a common oath of collective action and function by enforcing our rights as human rights defenders and collectively working for the protection of the rights of others. I think these are, in our own way, how ADN would like to sum up our experiences.